Johnny, thanks for coming in. And if you can go ahead and give us some kind of background on you and how you got here.
All right. My name is Johnny Morris. I'm Regional Director for JR Hobbs. I handle Georgia, Alabama, and the Panhandle of Florida. I'm more on the I am on the ops side. So myself, I'm financially motivated in my position with all my PMs and people under me kind of handling that. Been in HVAC for about 25 years. In between, I have built houses. So I've kind of been on the GC side as well on a smaller scale. I've done quite a bit of consulting for 65 hospitals in Virginia. And so back in HVAC, what I know, third generation.
When you were doing that consulting work, were you focusing just on the HVAC side, or were you focusing on the general contractor side?
No, well, more on the general contractor side, as it was a state-funded project for Virginia, and they were putting emergency water systems in hospitals for the backup for their boilers, chillers, things like that, in case they lost water, which they do a lot. And they could still keep their operating rooms cool and keep the hospital.
So you got experience with the large commercial side with cooling towers, chillers.
Oh yeah, my background starts at the larger industrial, and then throughout the years I've kind of worked. I don't want to say worked down, but I've done residential, multifamily, small commercial, large industrial.
Less complicated stuff.
Yeah, less complicated stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So does JR Hobbs mainly focus on multifamily and smaller equipment like air handlers, PTACs, stuff like that, or do y'all do the commercial side?
We do both. We do both. We do our bread and butter is multifamily. We have a small commercial division that focus on. We do a lot of Chick-fil-A's. We do a lot of retail spaces, things like that. But that's a completely different division.
Okay. Yeah, I think we had before you got here, we did a project over at Cobb Galleria. It was kind of a little bit of a blend because the common spaces had large air handlers that were on top of the roof and fed down through shafts down into the corridors. And so we didn't have corridor air handlers per se. We just had the air handlers up on the roof feeding in, and had a 100% positive pressure system in the corridors and common spaces. And then in the apartments, it was all the normal air handlers.
Because we do have a high-rise division as well.
Do you?
Which is considered major projects.
Doing a lot of kind of VAV and...
VAV, yep, exactly.
Okay, that's cool.
A lot of DOAS.
We're starting to do some of those high-rises. We were just finishing up a 21-story downtown. I'm not exactly sure what kind of system they had in place, but we're also doing I want to say it's 31 or 32 story down off of Peachtree, and starting to get into that commercial stuff here in Atlanta. And but a lot of our stuff is the multifamily, and that's typically where we have worked with y'all in the past. And we just finished up the WebGen project, and so I wanted to have you come in here and talk about the things that you see on a normal basis that either are good or bad throughout a project that we can focus on in the future to try and mitigate those mistakes or difficulties from happening in the future. So can you walk through a little bit of the process from the time that y'all get the pre-con stage to the on-site to the install and closing out a job?
Yeah, absolutely. So once the contract's signed, there's a huge review process for the contract throughout the company in different management positions. Once the contract's signed, the pre-con department takes that over, and that's when they start creating our submittals, shop drawings, different things like that. And, they go through all that process, and typically they'll keep the job in their control 45 to 60 days, hopefully, if they have time. Getting that, getting with the engineer, getting, with your department, and getting everything ready for operations.
Okay.
Once pre-con's done with it, then they send it over to operations, and that's when we start, coordinating with your field team and our field team, and getting things going.
Okay. When do y'all typically see the VDC and BIM effort happen? Is that kind of in between the pre-con and the op side, or is it more on the pre-con side?
It's more on the pre-con side.
Yeah.
It's more on the pre-con side. Timing's everything. Timing's everything. So we have a gentleman in-house that focuses on the BIM.
Okay.
And so he'll focus on that. He'll work with the project manager that's assigned to the job with different things. But yeah, typically it's mostly on the pre-con side.
How many of your projects actually require the VDC BIM effort nowadays?
I'd probably say, with the high rises, probably 40%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of percentage would you say GCs actually request for that effort to be done on a multifamily? Because I know we require it largely for the amenity spaces where there's a lot of structural steel, and so the coordination's needed for that. But once we get the truss shops, we like to do an effort through the corridor spaces and make sure that we can navigate through those truss systems.
Right. It's mainly, if they're going to do it, it's going to be in like an amenity area, a corridor. Like I said, it's more on the high-rise side than it is the smaller multifamily podium garden style. Garden style, never see it. Never see anything like that. I have seen it, and it didn't work.
Why didn't it work?
Well, it's, wood structure and tight spaces are just, it's easy to lay things in with them and show things where they don't cross, but then, you've got to have the right people installing that work to make sure it's going in the way it needs to go in order to coordinate with the BIM drawings and make things work.
Okay, so do you use different crews when you're talking about a job that is heavy VDC and BIM based versus something that's either only a little bit and then some that are absolutely none? I'm assuming that you base your sub crews off of people who are capable of looking at the requirements.
We do. It's and it goes along with everything. I mean, how extensive the job is. We've got certain crews that are just, they all, they're more experienced in the commercial side or the using a true blueprint per se. Everybody has blueprints, but they're not truly used for the most part. So we do have crews. Same with our superintendents, our project managers. Some people are more familiar with the process than others. So it's we look at that really close to say this person's going to fit well with this project and doing this, and that's kind of how we do it.
Okay. All right. Once you get through that VDC and that BIM effort, what are you seeing nowadays as far as being able to get ready for a job? Here in the last couple of years, because of COVID and supply chain issues, there's been a lot of problems being able to get materials. But are you seeing that get any better? Is it the same? Or what are you seeing right now?
Definitely getting better.
Okay.
Definitely getting better. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, we were also starting to go through the SEER change, which didn't help things on the equipment side. So that kind of doubled the heartache for getting equipment. It really put stress on the builders financially because they didn't know which way to go. We got to buy all this equipment now, and we got to put all this money out to get it done. But things are definitely, as a whole, getting better.
Okay.
Definitely getting better with materials.
What were some of the ways that you got through that difficulty of getting materials? And when we did get materials, it wasn't always enough. How did you overcome that challenge?
I don't know if it was ever really overcome as much, but a lot of hard work, a lot of smart people focused on it in our office, working really closely with our general contractors and, more storage than anything, saying, hey, we've got an opportunity to buy all these materials now. Let's buy them and then use what we have, especially flex. We'll use flex as an example. You might order 600 boxes or bags of flex and they ship you 30. And they don't tell you until the truck gets there.
When you
look
remember
at the packing
that
slip and you're like, what? So it was a lot of hard work from our purchasing department, and them just staying on it and working with our vendors, and just we finally got through it. I don't know if a lot of people did.
I remember it being a very difficult part of the inspection process, because we couldn't do inspections to get cover up because we didn't have flex, and that was always a challenge on WebGen to get that final cover up inspection, because we were just short 20 bags in a certain area, and we had to wait for it to come in the next week to be able to start the process. And that was difficult. Was it like a supplier's allotment?
It wasn't
to
a
different. Was it based off of like how much you spend with that supplier?
The way they did it was based on the prior year. Is the way they kind of handled it. The prior year, your purchasing numbers, they did their calculation, and that's how they came up with their allotments.
Because we're doing the same amount of work that we were doing last year.
Right. And but that allotment was cut a lot. I mean, so let's say you bought 50,000 bags of flex. You didn't get 50,000. It was their calculation to say, okay, out of that 50,000, we can give you 1,000. That's your allotment for when they come in. So that number's not accurate, but they had their own little formula with financials and things like that. The vendors did to kind of do it. But let's back up one question on how we got through it. It really costs, and not only my company, but every company, it was a financial burden for sure. I mean, because things you were paying 4 times the amount to just get something, to get you through an inspection, just so, just to have it. And
because you're trying to get it expedited.
Yeah. Well, not only expedited it, it was supply and demand. So everyone just jacked the prices up.
It wasn't just inflation. It was just sheer lack of material caused the price of it to go up.
You could go online, like, let's just use Marketplace for an example, and find someone in Texas that had a box truck full of flex that they wanted to sell, but instead of paying $25 for a flex, they were charging you $90.
Did y'all have to go that route sometimes?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
Yep, to get it. I mean, you had no choice. I mean, we're trying to keep our customers happy. Building doesn't stop. It's got to keep moving. So yeah, and there were some cases we had to do that.
Okay, so that's a really good way of thinking outside the box, to just go on Facebook Marketplace and look to see what other people have out there that are leftovers from other jobs. Yep. And that's a good way. I don't think we ever thought of that on any other aspect of the job, trying to get materials. That would have been a good tool to have back then. But I do remember we ordered, I want to say it was 2 40-foot containers to help y'all get all the air handlers for the job.
Yep.
For WebGen. Since we had the space, we had a whole bunch of 18 acres on the site. So we had plenty of room for storage. So we got a couple of Connexes out there, and then we went ahead and bought all of the air handlers for the entire job and brought them out so that we could lock in that price and the availability before we were ever ready for it. I think they came in, we were maybe on the 4th floor framing of the first building, like way early.
And you got air handlers sitting.
And we got air handlers for the whole job sitting out there.
Smart move though, because you made it. Price increases were happening almost monthly.
Oh yeah.
Monthly.
And it could be 10% the next month.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And availability was, prices were going up, availability was coming down, and, we're in the multifamily market. I mean, you can only suffer so much with price increases before it starts affecting everyone.
Oh yeah.
And it's and I'm sure it has you guys in on multiple projects.
Sure enough, it has. That was a point of contention at the very beginning of that project that started in 2001, the summer of 2001. And that's when lumber was out the roof. It was so expensive and the market was starting to come back down. And so they locked in some prices on the downward slope of that. And so we're kind of hoping that things were going to continue that pattern. Lumber was kind of setting the standard back then, what everything else was going to kind of do. So everybody was kind of hoping that everything else was going to come down, but then you were still seeing if it wasn't every month, it was at least every quarter you'd see a spike in the percent on everything, whether it be 5%, 10% on drywall, lumber, HVAC equipment, everything was going up. It was difficult back then. Electrical was hard to get. It was small components that make the whole piece they couldn't get, and made it difficult to get. Like we had disconnects that were difficult to get because they couldn't get some of the nuts and bolts to finish the parts down in Mexico. And because it's a UL rated system, you had to have those specific pieces
to make it work.
Finish it.
And
so not getting those small pieces affected things on a global scale.
Yep, and it goes down to the fine details for not only my trade but all the trades. Just for instance, refrigerant. At one point it shot up to over $500 a jug.
Gracious, for those little pink jugs.
Yes, yep, for the little jugs, the little pink jugs, man. And you think, you don't think much about that, but when you're doing 300 units on a job, and you're buying 80 jugs of refrigerant that has quadrupled in price, that'll kill your budget on a job.
Oh yeah. Can you walk us through what happened with the SEER changing? What exactly is that, and why did it change, and what happened?
Well, there's a periodic energy evaluation, let's call it, that goes on in the United States and across the world, I guess. But they look at how they can save energy, what's environmentally friendly. So there's going to be a refrigerant change as well coming in 2025. But the SEER rating is just to raise the efficiency, to help with the power grid. I mean, they're constantly looking ways to save energy, save pricing. Power companies are going up on energy because of our energy is coming down. Our energy dependency is going up. So energy companies are going up on rates, and it's more of a lobbying thing, where there's going to be changes made in the industry to improve.
But it's not you can do what we've done in the past couple of years and you can move towards this new one. You have to stop doing what we've been doing and you have to do this new thing.
That's
you
right.
don't have a choice.
You don't have a choice. That's right.
Manufacturers have to make their equipment based off of those requirements, and you have to buy and install based off of those requirements.
Manufacturing has stopped on the old equipment. So for instance, we still have jobs that are ongoing because durations have lasted longer, and a lot of companies didn't go out on that limb and buy the equipment, put it in storage, whether they didn't have the room, whatever the circumstances were. So now it's a struggle. There's still the SEER 1 equipment out there. It's just a struggle to find.
All right, so say I'm an owner and I'm about to build a building. It's 2023. We're prepping to build, starting, say, third quarter 2024, moving into 2025. We've got a new refrigerant that's coming out in 2025. How do I price up equipment that's going to be ready for that type of equipment now?
Well, what they'll do is they'll give you a grace period for that refrigerant. So it's like when 22 kind of went out. It went out on a certain date. When they had to stop manufacturing, but the manufacturers stocked up on it because you got to have it. I mean, there's millions of units out here with R22 still, and so they'll give you that grace period. As far as prepping for the price, It's kind of hard to do because you don't know what the price is going to be yet, at this point. And we won't know the price changes probably until they may give you a 90 to 120 day notice. We don't even know truly what the refrigerant is going to be. There's been, talk about it and things like that, but we don't know truly what exactly it's going to be.
Okay. How do we plan for, if we want to get in before that change happens and we need to go ahead and get that equipment under the standards that are currently in place, but we want a building that's going to last for 50 years, right? We want equipment that's going to last for the next 10 to 20 years before it needs any major overhauls. So with the equipment that we're using now that's going to be quote unquote out of date in the next year and a half, 2 years, how do you maintain that equipment after the fact if they're not going to be manufacturing that equipment anymore? How do you justify getting equipment that's going to be outdated as soon as you get the building?
Well, it's kind of the same as we did back when 410 took over 22. The parts will stay the same. There may be some small adjustments in the coils, things like that. The attachments to the service ports to the units, there may be some change in that since the new refrigerant is going to be more than likely a higher propane base than what it is now. We won't know exactly how long they're going to manufacture until DOE comes out with, or EPA comes out with a rule or law that says, hey, they got to stop at this date. I haven't seen that yet. So there's really no way, if you're going to build a building at this time, the equipment's not available, so you're kind of in that area. There's no, you don't have a choice but to go with the old equipment. But like 22, what they did was a manufacturer, they started producing a drop-in, which is compatible with the refrigerant, the R22. Okay. And they'll do the same for 410A. They'll make a drop-in, and what that is like a substitute for it. It'll be really expensive for a while, and then but there'll always be a way. Even when the new refrigerant comes in 25, we're still going to be servicing units that have R22 from back in, I think 2010 is when that changed, if I remember correctly. So there's always a way to do it. There's always a way to do it. It may not be as cost efficient as everyone would like, but until they let us know exactly what the dates are going to be and what the rules are going to be, the laws, the manufacturing dates, stopping, we don't know. Okay.
That sounds like so much fun.
Trust me, it's fun. And we, the HVAC industry has gone through it numerous times with changes.
Seems like it's relatively often.
It is, and it's like I said, it's constant. It's government. It's government. Yeah. So, and that's just that's all I can say is it's government, man.
They love to put requirements on us. Yeah. So you get the job, go through the VDCO effort. It goes to the ops side. What happens after that?
Once it goes to the ops, first thing we do is we start reviewing everything that's coming out of pre-con. And then we start getting, we'll have a takeoff that comes out of pre-con as well. We'll start reviewing that takeoff, which is our materials. We'll start matching submittals to equipment. We'll just start trying to review everything as a team, because we have each job has a PM team. That PM has an APM. That APM or that PPM has an APM. PPM manages those guys or ladies, whichever it may be, and then they just start reviewing everything. Then we'll start cutting POs to our vendors so they know, hey, this is coming. We want to give them enough time to get their materials in place as well.
How much time do you have to give them?
Now, I would say it varies a lot of times. We try to give them 6 weeks. Okay. At this point, sometimes they only need 2. It depends on the equipment. It depends on what it is.
say for your standard, you're going to do your non-weather sensitive roof. We're going to go in and do our outside air and our exhaust, and it's just largely pipe and no flex. How much time you got to have for that?
Right now, we're trying to give 6 weeks,
Okay.
a 6-week look ahead, because our PMs base their schedules on 6 weeks. Because we create our own schedules in house as well. After we receive your schedule, we'll sit down and create our own schedule for our guys with the look ahead. And so, but to answer your question, 4 weeks minimum, 6 weeks probably max, unless it's a long lead time item.
Okay. What are the long lead time items right now?
Long lead time items are, special made to order items, garage fans, could be certain types of fire dampers, depending on what is spec'd out. Typically your basic things, pipe, flex, right now they're not long lead time items. It's just specialty items that are different on each job. 6-inch flex is 6-inch flex for the most part. You're going to use that same 6-inch flex on, but a garage fan, your voltages, your horsepowers, your CFMs, all that changes from job to job. So anything like that that's not just a standard everyday item is going to be what's considered specialty.
Okay, so like when you get into the commercial side and you've got stuff that's a little more complicated, like VAVs that got to get hard piped in and have more electrical requirements and stuff, and specialty pieces that go with it and stuff like that, would be a longer lead time.
Yeah, some of those items we're looking at 16, 18 weeks.
Okay.
Yep.
Air handlers, chillers, cooling towers, all that's several months.
Yeah, can be several months. Even down to like, instead of having a mill finish louver for like an exhaust or a fresh air, if GC says, or, design team, architect, I want it painted, that can take a 6-week lead time and turn it into a 12 to 16-week lead time.
Is that something that is painted at their factory, or the finish is changed at the factory? Or is that something where you buy the raw material, you buy that louver, and you have it, the finish changed after the fact?
No, that's done at the factory from the manufacturer. Most of the time, they can be field painted, which is what I normally recommend. Is like, you pick the paint, you paint. We'll order it, paint grip, and then you don't have to wait, and you can just have your painter spray them. But if you want it to come, powder coated from the factory,
it takes a lot longer.
It takes a lot longer, and they're going to do it there. And then it's handling it once you receive it, because you can't scratch it. You can't, so now you got a storage issue where you've got to put it somewhere until it can be installed that there's no damage. Minimizing
the movement of material is definitely key to making sure that things go better.
Yep, absolutely.
Have you heard of the lean construction process?
I have. I'm very familiar with the lean.
Okay. So how often are you seeing the lean process used by GCs nowadays? It's
more on the larger projects. Student housing, they're really getting into using that to try to mitigate people being on top of each other as much. But it's really, I would say I've seen probably builders using it 30% more than what I saw 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's something that our company has taken on, and we're instituting throughout the company, and all our jobs are running on that lean process, from the morning huddles to the pull plans and the 3-week look aheads and the percent plan complete each week, that sort of deal, to try and make the entire process as efficient as possible, because a lot of the things that we do are not efficient, and we need to fix that to make things better for us. The way that the market has gone and getting so much more expensive to get the same end product, we've got to figure out better ways to do things.
Yep.
And so how are y'all doing that?
To improve the processes?
Yes.
Is that? you know, as far as lean or
In any way.
In any
What
way?
are y'all doing to make the process more efficient and just overall better?
well, as a team, as a company, but you know, as far as my region, we meet constantly. The PMs and the superintendents, the APMs, we meet constantly to say, hey, this is where the job's at. You know, where, and then we look at like the other trades as well. It's kind of a lean process, but not putting it on a board or a wall or something. You know, it's like, hey, where are the electricians at this day? You know, they're coming in behind us. Are they catch it? You know, are we holding them up? Or is the plumber ready for us? What are we doing? Making sure our materials are on site is number one key to getting the process going. And then, you know, it's mainly scheduling, it's communication. And what I've found is if we can get a general contractor superintendent to really have empathy in what we're doing, not sympathy, but empathy, to understand what's going on, to say, hey, we really need this in order to be productive. If we can convince that individual to look at it that way, then it makes everyone's life easier, including, and it makes the process from our end, your end, everything go smoother. And we're really focusing on that training with our superintendents now so they know how to communicate better with the on-site superintendent, the general contractor superintendent, to say, hey, this is what we need, instead of just having, you know, in the past it's been yelling matches. You should be here. Why are you not there? Why is your inspection not done? And it all comes from lack of communication, and not always on our part, not always on the GC's part, just a lack of communication as a whole, to say why, you know, instead of understanding why we're where we are where we're at, you know, it's just a finger pointing, your fault, your fault, your fault. And we're really trying to get away from that with our superintendents and communicating that, you know, hey, Mr. Superintendent, your plumber, you know, he hasn't gotten out of these apartments yet or this area yet, so we need to adjust our schedule. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier with our PMs are doing their own look aheads off of your schedule, so they can adjust and, you know, also speak with the superintendent or the project managers on the job and say, this is what we need from you in order for us to be successful. And that seemed to help quite a bit.
And that does come with the lean process, whether you like it or not. If you follow the process, it will get you there. Because to do that process, you do have to have that communication. You have to get good at that communication.
Yeah,
to understand everybody's part in it is important to be able to plan effectively on how to get through whatever stage of the project you're in. If you don't take into account information from the person who's an expert at that task, and you just base the information or the decisions on the experience you've had in the past, and you're missing a piece or you've forgotten it, then that's going to cause a problem.
Yeah.
You got to listen to the people who are the ones doing the work, but those people also have to be able to communicate that information to you also.
Absolutely. So I haven't had any experience with lean through you guys on your projects, but in the past, what I've noticed is the lean process starts out really, really well. You know, everybody's given their dates and their durations and where they're going to be and how they're going to get there, but there's no leadership from the GC. So you have a superintendent or a project manager that is sitting back just watching the process happen. And instead of jumping in and saying, hey, Mr. HVAC guy, you know, you're telling me you can be here on this date, but you haven't looked at my drywall or my insulation or whatever it may be ahead of you. They just kind of look back, and then when it doesn't happen, they say, well, you put it on the board that you would be there, you know. And, you know, as a new generation of superintendents, let's call it, coming up from the GC side and, you know, the subcontractor side, it's the experience levels have changed for whatever reason. Everything's, technology these days, and there's no real, I'm a leadership type of person. I mean, I like to see leadership and guidance from the GC. Not, you don't know our trade, or more than likely you don't. Just like if we could build the building, we would, right? We're not general contractors, but it would help if they, if the superintendents understood the process that the subs are going through a little more, so they could help guide the way instead of everyone just jumping up and throwing up dates. That's when I see the lean process go wrong, is when everybody's throwing up their dates, and then you get a bunch of people on top of each other. Then it just becomes a finger pointing. Well, you said you were going to be done by this date, or you said, you weren't going to start on this date. There's a lot more to it than just putting up your schedule. It's a great process. But we all know sometimes you might have a subcontractor that has 10 guys available that day, and he sends 10 guys. Well, if he gets ahead of schedule when you're doing a lean process, that affects
everybody, yeah.
Right. So he's like, well, if I can't, if I got to pull 5 of my guys off because the job's moving too slow. No, the job's not moving too slow. You just don't have you're not consistent on what you're giving me. So it's a balance. It's a balance, and it's really important to have that leadership from the superintendent, the GC superintendent, GC project manager, to kind of guide that way, to guide the subs in the way to say, hey, let's look at what we're doing every day. I know it takes an extra 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it may be, and everyone's anxious to get out in the field and go to work because time is money, but it's costing more time to fix all the problems that come with it than it does to just take that 45 minutes and work it out right then.
So that's
the long answer.
Well, that brings up a few things. One of them is if you do the process correctly and you do all parts of it, and you have to do all parts of it to really take the full advantage of the system, is you have to do the daily huddles where you're in there for about 15 to 20 minutes talking with everybody about what's happening that day, and then maybe what's happening the very next day. And so you're taking care of the immediate issues. Then you're also talking about your pull plan, and that pull plan is your next major milestone, where you get in and you talk about how you're going to get there,
right?
Working your way backwards, right? And that's where everybody's making their commitments. But we have to make sure that you're making commitments based off of the contracts that everybody signed to durations and productivity. And not doing things out of sequence. It's key for the GC team to make sure that you aren't going to get out of order unless it makes sense overall. So just because it'll be easier if you can get in there to do your thing ahead of when you thought you were going to, doesn't mean that that's going to make it easy for the other person that has to come behind you, maybe make it more difficult for them. So then you got to talk about whether or not that's a good idea, or if you need to just chill out, wait until they get their task done, and then you come in and get in behind them. Just because you got more people may not make it the correct or best way for the project as a whole. Yep. Just because you've got extra manpower right now, you getting done early doesn't always make everything better.
Most of the time it doesn't. It hurts the people behind you coming in.
And then you've also got to do the third part, which is the percent plan complete, where you review it each week and go over the commitments that were made for that week and the production rates that you agreed to that week, and how many things actually got hit and how many things got missed. And why did they get missed? Evaluate why. Was it a material supply issue that's going to carry into the next week or 2 weeks? Is it a weather delay? Is it a RFI or ASI or more information that we're waiting on from the design team or the owner to make a decision on? Is it stuff that's just completely out of our hands, or is it something that we just didn't follow through on the commitments that were made?
Right.
But you've got to take all that into account when you're making your plans for the next week or the next 3 weeks. and make sure that ultimately they don't affect that major milestone that you did all the effort of doing the pool plan, where you spend an entire day in a room locked up with a bunch of guys, yelling and hollering at each other, deciding on how you're going to get there.
Yep, that's
and
right.
if you fall short of those goals each week, then you're going to fall short of that milestone.
Absolutely. And that goes back to the leadership part. I mean, it's really, my opinion, and it's just my opinion, a lot of times the superintendents kind of let the subcontractors kind of make their own schedules when they're doing a pool plan like that. And I just feel there needs to be a lot of guidance, a lot of leadership in that, saying, hey, from my experience, working with this, it hasn't worked this way. And you can't just throw a subcontractor into this scenario that hasn't done the pool plan, that hasn't had to keep up with those commitments in the past. They're just kind of saying, Patrick wants me done by the 6th, so as long as I'm done by the 6th, doesn't matter. But it does matter, because you got people behind you that need to be done on the 6th as well, that you're pushing into, they're trying to cram all their work into 2 days instead of 5 days because you didn't proceed with your dates. So
It is key to make sure that you guide that circus, because that's what it can be, is a circus of a bunch of people and a bunch of ideas being thrown around all at one time, and everybody thinks they're right. And so you do have to have a leader there to be able to make sure it all stays on track. And that's our responsibility, to make sure that everybody understands the goal, where we're headed, and how we get there is what we're there to figure out.
That's right.
During that meeting. And everybody's opinion matters and needs to be considered. But just because we don't take your opinion or we don't make that the final plan doesn't mean it's not valuable opinion to have. It just may not work with the project as a whole. And that's our part, is to make sure that we're thinking about the project as a whole, and all the parts and pieces that go into it, to make sure that they all work together, and not making sure that we're catering just to one aspect of it, making sure that every part of that goes well. We're going to make sure all of them do. And so there is a balance.
Yep. And I'll give you an example. A huge example is, up until about 5-6 years ago, air handlers were always installed on the rough end stage. There was pre-rock put in the closets. Now the owners have started wanting a better finish inside the mechanical closets, but it really, by doing that, it really pushes the subs to, it's like a race to the end, because without the air handler, now we got to get in before the plumber puts his water heater in. So now he's waiting on us if he has his water heaters on site, because we've been waiting on the drywall finish. We've been waiting on the painter if they're going to that level with the closet. Now the electrician can't do his work. Now we've got a live sprinkler head in a closet, which happens all the time. A sprinkler head gets busted, and floods units, all because that process has changed. And I don't understand why it's changed throughout the years, but it's really changed, and it sets the entire project back, I would say 3 to 4 weeks, just by not doing that on the rough end.
Yeah, that has changed. The way we sequence that work has changed a little bit. We do things a little bit different than that now.
Yeah, and it's not just you guys. It's everyone. It's very rare that you get to install your air handlers on a rough end.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore.
Of a building. Once in a blue moon, you'll get the older
supers,
guy that's like, this is how I'm going to do it.
Okay.
And we're so happy. I mean, we're so happy. One, we get the bill for it.
Mm-hmm.
Two, it's just, we're in there with a flame. We're not really working around a finished product. We're not so much worried about busting a sprinkler head or damaging a water heater or whatever it may be. Burning the paint on a wall. It happens. So it slows the process down some by doing it on the final.
Okay, I got one thing that I want to talk about that didn't happen on WebGen, and It happened before you came over to JR Hobbs, but this is something I want everybody to understand. Everybody that's listening, when we're doing it that process now, right? You're doing your rough in, you're putting in your supply box and your damper in the ceiling of the mechanical room. You're putting your line sets in. I don't care who it is. You've got to get the sub to go in there and fire caulk the line sets before you put the air handler in, before you put the water heater in. Because if you wait until afterwards, it's so difficult to get to them and be able to do a quality job on that fire caulking through the ceiling and through the floor. That was what we ran into, and it was so hard to get back to it and get back behind it and between the line set and the wall.
Right.
And we had tried to tell the guy that was on site to make sure that they get in there now, fire caulk everything while you have access to it and easy access to it. There's no issues. And when you're tying in the rest of the system later on, you might have some cracks and you might pull it out a little bit, but overall it's not going to be that bad, and you're going to already have the majority of the work done. And you're not going to shoot yourself in the foot by trying to do it after the fact when stuff's in your way and you've put that stuff in your way. And that is something that the guys need to really, truly understand. They've got to do things in the right order and well thought out and not put your foot in your mouth.
Yep, absolutely. They should have listened and worked with the team to make that happen. I will say this, and I don't know exactly how that job went with the inspection departments. I wasn't involved until the end, but a lot of times the inspection department, the fire caulking happens on the floor, on the rough end as well, the wood, the raw wood, which is sufficient for code. But then when gypcrete gets poured, flooring goes in, and then the inspection department wants you to come back and fire caulk again.
That's right.
And that shouldn't be the process. A lot of jurisdictions do not require you to do that. Now,
Gwinnett County does.
Yeah, Gwinnett County does. As far as the ceilings have always been a problem. I have a process that I like to see. And what I don't like to see is a bunch of fire caulk packed into a ceiling to cover holes. So the biggest issue that we run into doing that, and this is on all jobs, is they should try to bring each line set through the floor, through a sleeve or a hole, 4 inches max diameter. Sometimes you can get about 2 maybe in that hole, and it goes up through the ceiling. Well, if you've got, let's say, 4 of those coming up, depending on the size of the building, and you take them through the ceiling, what happens is, it's not a finger pointing, but the drywall guy, when he goes to put his drywall in, he pulls them all together.
Yes, he does.
Right? And he cuts his hole and boom. But when they come back and finish it, really they should be finishing that area to within about a 1/4 inch of the refrigerant lines.
That's right.
They don't. So then it becomes, and this is where it goes back to, like I said, a GC superintendent having, empathy and understanding that if they had have done that, then we could jump up there, put a 1/4 inch, bead of caulk around it, and we're good to go. Instead, we're up there trying to fill a 3-inch gap around all these line sets. So, yeah, it's a tough scenario, but you're right. It should be done before the air handler goes in, before any obstacles are in your way. I think the biggest thing with that, and we know this is all production work, is anytime you do that, the subcontractor comes back and says, well, I want more money.
Oh, yeah.
Because I normally do it when the air handler is installed.
That's right.
If that's the case, we have to eat that money. What I'd like to see is for the superintendent to say, I'm going to take care of that. Our superintendent, our superintendent say, okay, I'm going to jump on that. Even if he has to make a phone call to the office, whatever he has to do to his project manager to say, hey, they want me to do it this way. Come look at it. It can be worked out a lot of different ways. But I don't like to wait to the last minute, and I don't like a messy looking closet.
That's like somebody got shot up in there.
Yeah, that's my pet peeve.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's not just us. I see it with everyone. There, you know, if fire marshals, jurisdictions, let's say, really held us to details, I don't know if one would ever pass, to be honest with you. And when I say us, I mean as a construction industry. You know,
well, if you do stuff in Athens, the fire marshals will do a pull test.
Yeah.
And if they do that pull test, that's where you find out where you're weak.
Yeah, I've done it in Athens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Athens is real strict about doing that pull test. Cobb County can be also. Gwinnett County wasn't that way, but Gwinnett County did have that that additional step where they had us do it before we poured the gypcrete, and they wouldn't let us pour the gypcrete until it was done. And then when it comes around time for final inspections, and you've already done it below the gypcrete, but they can't see it. And when we've had a new fire marshal, because we went through 3 on that job.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it got handed over to 3 different fire marshals throughout the process. And when we're hit with a new fire marshal, they don't know for sure that something was done. And so do it again.
Do it again, just so we know. Better safe than sorry.
Yep.
So what I like to see is when a sleeve in the ceiling and the floor.
I'd love to see that.
That's my pet peeve for that. And that's what I've required in the past from my teams is, you know, that way you're not, if the drywall's not fired, that's the drywaller's problem.
Yep.
All I need to seal is inside of my pipe where my, you know, as long as I can get my annular space, get my fire caulk in, then I'm rated for what I'm required to be. The hole in the drywall, that's the drywall guy's problem.
Okay. What about,
I don't mean to say problem, but that falls under him.
what about the detail where, okay, so you got a sleeve that comes through drywall ceiling. You've got to fill the space inside of the sleeve that where the line set comes through. So you do rock wool and you do fire caulk around it, but you also have to penetrate where it goes through the drywall system, where it goes through that floor ceiling assembly, where it penetrates that. That also has to get fire caulked.
You mean the sleeve itself?
The sleeve itself to the drywall, correct?
Yeah. Well, typically, ideally, if the drywall guy, it doesn't have to be fire caulk. It just, there can't be more than I think the 1/8 of an inch that they can have around that.
Okay, but what about when the fire marshal says that's a penetration through drywall? You need to fire caulk it.
Then you got to fire caulk it.
Yeah.
Then you just got to fire caulk it.
But who is that? Is that a drywall man or is that you?
We would do it. We would do it. I mean, and just that argument is.
That's typically who I would go to.
Yeah, you know.
You're the one who made the penetration,
Right.
whether that be a sleeve or you just sticking the line set through the ceiling. I'm going to go to you for that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, typically, and that's where the confusion comes in. We really didn't make that penetration. The sleeve is there on rough end.
Yeah.
It's actually the drywall guys. But that now we're, you know,
You're splitting hairs at that point.
Splitting hairs at that point.
And it's just at that point you're not going to get a drywall guy to come back and do fire caulk.
Yeah. But if the fire, and like I said, if the drywall guy does his part and gets it within a 1/4 inch,
It's not that big of a deal.
It's not a big deal. It's when they jump in and their production work as well.
Oh, yeah.
We know, and so it's when you walk in and you look up and you know you can take a golf ball and run around it and push it up into the ceiling all the way around because that's the gap you have. That's when I would say, look, get your drywall guy to come back, get me as close to the pipe as he can, and then I'll have my people come in and put a bead of caulk around it.
And that's what I would do.
Yeah.
I would have them come in, do a hot patch, get up closer to it. I'll make them give you a 1/4 inch.
Yeah, because now instead of me using a tube of fire caulk, you know, I've used a bead of fire caulk around a pipe, and we move on. So yeah, that's the only thing. That's where the conflict kind of comes in, and you know, and it's just look. Everybody's trying to make money. Everybody, if it's 1 or 2, you do what you got to do and you move on. But if it's a whole building or 2 buildings and you've got that issue, then Yeah.
Oh yeah, it can multiply very
the
quickly.
dry water guy to come back. And after they come back once, typically you don't have the problem on the rest of the building unless it's a different crew.
Yeah, if you set that standard early on, they're not going to want to go through that effort again. So they'll make sure they do it when they do it the first time. You fix it, you hold them to that standard early on, and then they'll make sure that that standard's carried on throughout the rest of the project.
Yeah. So I can complain and say, well, the drywall guys pull our line sets together and they make it hard for us. But then I can also look at me and say, well, we could have done a better job getting the sleeve in there, giving them something to work with. A lot of times it's a space issue in the ceiling, but, you know, we could give them something better to work with. And, you know, they could probably do a better job if we, you know.
Well, a space thing is something that we've learned in the last couple of projects, making sure that in these wood frame buildings that we've got enough space for your supply duct and trying to do everything we can to make sure it's centered in the space in that mechanical room so that you do have room, 1 for light, 2 for the line set, 3 for the fire sprinkler. Trying to make sure that no matter where we put that supply, there's enough room for those things. And we have to do that early enough where when we're doing the shop drawings for the trusses, we're taking that into consideration and making sure that the standard 24 inch on center, which doesn't give you the 22 inches that you need clearance for a supply duct, you've got to move those trusses out about 3 inches so that you do get that 22 inches for that supply duct coming out of the air handler, and you can get through those trusses and you're not trying to modify the shape of that air handler because you can't change the CFM that's going through there. So you can make it skinnier and wider, but that's going to take up a lot more ceiling space. And trying to do that early on is something that you've got to take into account so that you don't have that issue later on down the road.
Absolutely. And once you put an offset in a closet,
you're out of room.
Yeah, you're out of room now, and your line sets are already there. Now that's when you got the mess of I can't get the fire caulk in. The drywall can't do a nice job for what he needs to do. It turns into a punch list nightmare. And so that's a great thing. I love seeing when truss layouts come out and it has our duct in the closet marked. So we can look and see if it's laying over a truss and say, hey, we need to spread this one, whatever it is. I mean,
that's definitely one of the things that Jay and I have tried to do in the last couple of projects is to make sure that's accounted for. And when we first start doing trusses with the framer, once they get their first section of trusses on site for the next floor up, we will get those laid out, make sure that they've done it the way that is shown on the shops. And then we'll take the plumber and HVAC into those units, and most of them are pretty standard, walking through those units, looking at the layout. Okay, we've done 6 units right here in this section, laid out these floor trusses. Let's make sure that there's no trusses over any standpipes. There's trusses have enough space in the mechanical units. We don't have the trusses flip the wrong direction so that you don't have cross braces where you've got to run your exhaust or your outside air, and you've got to change your routing, because every time you change your routing might affect the plumber's sanitary coming out of a toilet or a shower tub. So making sure that everybody has put their eyes on these typical units and given their blessing that they can come in here and they can do their rough end the way it's set out, so that there's a standard for this framer. Okay, this one, even though it does show it here on shop drawings, is going to be in the way of the standpipe for this toilet stack. Got to make sure it's off to the side, or they didn't see that it needs to be offset to the left-hand side of that HVAC closet because we're not mounting it on the back wall. We're having it mounted on the sidewall for whatever reason or some other reason that we've got to adjust it. But once you go in there and you actually see the space in person with those trusses there, with the superintendent from the HVAC and from plumbing and sprinkler too, sometimes depending on whether they've got a main running through that area or not, but making sure everybody's put their eyes on it and said, okay, we're good. But if there is something that needs to change, we need to know about it now so that you can start making those changes moving forward, and you haven't built half a building and then have to go back and change all of them.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a great point. And the biggest thing, you've done your part at that point. Now we've got to do our part to make sure that we're installing it. Every trade is installing everything the same. You know, not a new crew comes in and now they're running this way. I see that happen a lot. You know, you do a mock up and everybody's happy, and you know, we're moving on and production's going, and you know, everything's going, and then boom, a new crew comes on site and it changes everything.
Mock-up's a great point. You bring in whoever you have available on a job site to come do your mock-up for the GC, but that crew's never going to step foot out on that job ever again. You can't have that. You got to have whoever it is that's going to be doing that job needs to be the one that does that, that understands, and we call it a first look. We'll do a first look for just about every single trade. We'll do a first set of units for rough-in, or we'll do the first look for a window being installed for waterproofing details, stuff like that, to make sure that the crew that's there going to be installing whatever that trade is, whatever that task is, and they're doing it the way that those specific drawings and those specific details call for, and they're not installing it like the last job they did.
Right.
And so that it's specific to this project, and if they ever change out that crew for whatever reason, you got to do another one. Make sure that that new crew understands it.
Understands the same way. Yep, you're right.
And if you don't, you'll get in trouble. You'll have to fix it at some point down the road, deal with it now when they're new, or deal with it down the road and you got to fix 150 of them.
Yep, that's right.
So, yeah, that's a hard lesson learned.
Yeah, definitely a hard lesson. We've all learned it.
Oh yeah.
That's the thing. And once you learn that lesson, they should. You would think the subs as well. Even the installers would say, "Hey, you know, it cost me a day's worth of work on this past project here, so I'm gonna make sure." But sometimes they don't.
They don't. They just keep doing it the way they've always
scope
done
driven.
it.
They're scope driven.
So a lot of them are just driven by sheer production. What's the production rate you typically see with, say, non-weather sensitive rough in a 2-bedroom unit? I like to try and break out my areas to around 20 units per area. Seems to work pretty well for the 1 week span for most trades.
Yep.
But what are the typical production rates you see out of your crews?
Well, on standard, we'll use garden style as an example. They should be, a 5-man crew can typically rough in 24 units in 7 days.
Okay.
Is about
7 working days.
7 working days. That's correct.
Okay.
Is what it takes them to do.
Okay.
And again, it just all depends on how many issues there are. But this perfect scenario, 6 to 7 days.
So that's somewhere around 3 to 4 units a day.
Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty good. I typically do, depending on the crew. If I worked with the crew before, I'll do 4 to 5 units a day if they've done well. If it's a pretty standard 2-bedroom unit or a bunch of 1-bedroom units. Yeah. But yeah, 3 to 4 is pretty good.
And that all depends. I mean, nowadays you've got fresh air coming in with fans and kitchen exhaust, and depending on where you're at, you start throwing those things in, it throws the numbers off a little bit. But I'm just looking at standard average apartment. That's what they should be able to do.
And that's for non-weather sensitive roof.
Right.
All right, for weather sensitive roof, where you have to put in the extra duct board, you have to put in the flex, you have to make sure everything's taped well, you have to make sure there's no holes and stuff, and it takes a little bit more time.
Yeah, no, let's back. I'm sorry. That's for both.
Okay, that's for both.
Dry and wet. We call it dry and wet rough. Yeah. For dry and wet rough, they should be able to do it in 24 apartments in 7 working days. Is what I expect.
That's pretty good.
And they're moving doing that, and that depends on weather, things like that. But
now, does that include the corridors in those areas too? No. How much for corridors for your standard corridor, where you've got, say, 150 foot corridor, 100 to 150 foot?
They can probably do maybe 2 a day of those. If the dry and wet rough. Okay. On that, they can probably do 2 a day.
2 corridors a day,
2 corridors.
or a corridor in 2 days?
No, 2 corridors a day.
Okay.
They should be able to do. Yeah, because typically a corridor, they've got a long run that's going down to the furthest point, dropping. So that's one supply. Corridors are very easy to condition. And then, so they typically have larger registers, fewer runs.
Okay.
So they don't want to see, like in an apartment you walk in, you've got, maybe one in the bedroom, one in the bathroom, one here, boom, boom, boom. Corridor, they're just dumping the air into the corridor.
Well, that's if you're going to run like a 10 or 12 inch flex, and then you're going to have a register that tees off of it and it shrinks down in size after that, right?
Yeah. Well, typically, a corridor, depending on the building, you're looking, let's say a two-ton unit. So a 2-ton unit, we're looking at 800 CFM. So that's typically, depending on space, if you have the space, you're going to put 150. You're going to put 2 supply ducts on one end and two supply ducts on the other, kind of even them out.
Yep.
To get rid of your air, because you want to get rid of, you want to be able to use that 800 CFM, so we're not putting pressure back on our blower, noise issues, things like that, and then you're done. You got your return, which normally goes in it on the final. Now, because we're not setting air handlers on rough end again.
Yep.
And
you got a fire damper.
Yeah.
In the wall.
Yeah, and there's no exhaust. You've got a fresh air maybe, depending on the building. You've got a fresh air coming in,
but it's all positive pressure.
Yeah. And you got 4 supply ducts that return, and you're done.
How do y'all deal with the supply duct coming out into the corridor? That's always an issue in wood buildings, at least, with the structural aspect of that corridor wall, and trying to figure out how to get the correct CFM through that wall. Typically, they show on the plans going over the header of the door. That's not always the best way to do it. It never works because you got a header there. So what do you see as the normal fix?
So the normal fix, and this comes from experience. Again, corridors are very easy to condition. I mean, they're surrounded by conditioned air. Doors are opening, doors are closing. You've got different air coming from everywhere. You can just try to get enough duct out inside of the closet itself above the ceiling that you can run flex from that point all the way out into the corridor. Corridors are less noise sensitive. No one's hanging out in the corridor.
Yeah, that's true.
So they're just walking through, so they're less noise sensitive. They don't, and you're not sitting in one place. Like this room here, if it was hot in here, we would know it. But if we just walked in and walked out,
never know.
And the same way with corridors. So now we're just looking at pressurization, things like that. If you're moving your CFM, you're getting the correct pressurization, and as simple as that. And then you've got your fresh air coming in, so that's going to help with any staleness or stagnant air in the corridors or anything like that. So yeah, I like to call it divide and conquer. If you can split it up and shrink it down in size so that you can get it through that structure, things can work out a little bit better. Trying to take a 24 by 18 supply out of a mechanical unit into a corridor is near impossible. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so splitting that up into, say, getting your supply up into the ceiling and splitting off into 2 12s in 2 different directions, and then splitting that off from there, those 12s can get out into the corridor a heck of a lot easier. But say you got to put flex out in, or you got to put the duct board out in there into the corridor so that you can have 5 runs or 4 runs come off of it, changing the shape so that you can fit through into the truss cavity is something we've done in the past. And then trying to keep everything opposite side of the corridor from the mechanical units, like fire sprinkler mains and domestic water mains, keeping those opposite side of the corridor so that when you're coming out into the corridor with your HVAC runs, you're coming out into the corridor and then immediately teeing off or dumping out either side from there. You're not going all the way across the corridor and having to try and get underneath it and lowering your ceiling heights.
I'm a huge advocate for sidewall registers. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll make the suggestion, let's put a, and it depends. I mean, is it a straight corridor? Is it a L shape where you're turning a corner? You know, if it's a straight corridor, you know, I'll say, hey, let's take one of these supplies, put in the sidewall right outside the mechanical closet, and let's just dump air into the corridor. And then it reduces the amount of duct. Then we can take that trunk line and shrink it down more and get it out. If it's a L shape, I try to advocate to put
two sides.
Two sides. And again, that reduces that duct size to where we can get out. There's a lot of ways to do things, and like I said, it's corridors are just so easy to condition, and you know we're all about, no matter design, engineering, whatever we're doing, comfort is what we sell. I mean that's what it boils down to, and getting the corridors comfortable for people that, you know, for the limited amount of time that they're in there is not a hard thing to do. A lot of times it gets difficult just because it needs to be designed perfectly.
Yeah.
But, you know, with a corridor, it's not, you know, we're not working in hospitals. Obviously, if you're in a hospital, it makes a huge difference. But again, we're just looking to make everyone comfortable. And, you know, that's when you start having that discussion with the engineer, architect, you know, hey, we can do it this way. They're normally on board with it. We just want to get air out there so you're not sweating.
You're comfortable getting from your car to your apartment.
Yep. And we're not putting, you know, we're not slamming doors because we got a negative pressure, or, you know, that, you know, they're the things that we focus on instead of, okay, he says he wants a 24 by 12 duct there, and we had to give him a 24 by 8 or a 24 by 10, you know, as long as we can redirect that air, like to a sidewall or something. I don't think I've ever, knock on wood, had an issue with a corridor.
It's always been something that's like slam me right in the face. Oh crap. Can't get that through that structure. Now what do we do? And if you've never gone through it, that's something that takes a long time to figure out. And if it's a relatively inexperienced GC superintendent and a relatively inexperienced superintendent from the HVAC contractor side too, boy, you're just in a world of hurt. You're just going to bang your head up against the wall for a while until you finally figure it out. And I've had to do that a few times.
Oh, yeah. But you learn over time.
Yeah. So now that you've got all the work in place, how do you QC your work? We have a very extensive QC process. Okay. Now, again, you have to use it, you know, to benefit from it. But we use smart sheets. I think you and I discussed this. We use smart sheets. There's a QC process on there for our superintendents. There's a QC process on there for our project managers. It's even down to, if I go on a job, there's a QC process there for me. Okay. So if I go on a job, they want me to go through this QC process to make sure. So our QC process is, you know, one, we do a daily pre-task. All of our superintendents should be doing daily pre-tasks. And this is something that's monitored and that we track daily. Daily pre-task is setting up what we're going to do for that day. It's a pull plan for our subcontractor, our superintendents, whatever that may be. With that daily pre-task, our superintendent should be taking the daily pre-task, and that's what they should be comparing their QC to for that day. This is a daily process, a daily QC process. Okay. During that process, they can also let their team know that there was a problem. So we have a method that says this gets flagged, so our PM gets it. We discuss that like a color, like a stoplight. If it's red, it's bad. We all see it. We all know there's an issue. We're going to work on that. We need to get that fixed. They may put it on a yellow and say, hey, you know,
subcontractor didn't fire call, and the GC asked us to do it. So then that'll go to the PM. PM get with the superintendent. They'll try to make that happen. But our QC is walking every apartment, every whatever area you're working in that day should be reflected in your QC report when it comes in at the end of the day.
Okay.
Or the next day, depending on when the work is completed.
What do y'all do with those reports after you get them? So they've gone through the effort to walk all the units and double check everything and make sure it's good. Okay, so now they've done that initial check, and how do they manage the correction of any items that aren't correct?
If it depends on whose responsibility is. If it's the GC's responsibility, then the PM or the superintendent will get with the field team there and work that out. If it's our subcontractor's responsibility, then we try to get them to do it as well. But if it's something that is kind of that gray area, who should have done it, then the superintendent should be just getting it done and being it over with.
Okay.
That way we don't have that. I don't want to be on your punch list at the end of the day. And, that's to jump forward. That's what kills everyone at the end of a job.
Coming back 30
it's coming
times.
back, fix, because you've got your QC walk, then you've got
The architects, and then the engineers, and
the owners, and next thing you know, you've done 4, 5, 6 punch lists, and it's like, how did we get to this point that we've had this many punch? Look, if I'm getting punch items that says, there's a crack in the fire caulk, or there's a scratch on the grill, or a fan is noisy, that's one thing. But if I'm getting punch lists that there's grills missing, there's no fire caulk, then that's a problem. That's when we have to stop and address. So there's a fine line between, what is a real punch item compared to a need and a want.
Or a deficiency item.
Let's call it that. An owner always wants everything perfect.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they can't. I wish everyone could turn over 100% product, but, perfect product, I should say. But you got to kind of look at that and use your common sense and your experience to say, okay, we've got a GC issue, an owner issue, or we've got a superintendent issue, being our superintendent. And once we do see that we have a superintendent issue, then we have to address that, whether it be on a PIP plan or whatever it be. But we can't. We want to leave a quality product. And multifamily has changed so much over the years that, used to multifamily was just get it in as fast as you can go. We don't care what it looks like. We don't care what it sounds like. Just get it in, make money, move. And this is from everybody, from the GC down. And now multifamily has turned in, to more of a commercial product. And everyone is noticing every flaw you have. So we really try to pay attention to the QC. I see the QC list for the most part. I don't see them if there's a small problem, I don't see it. But if we get something flagged from our field that says this is a problem, it's emailed to me immediately as soon as they flag it.
And that's done through the what'd you call it?
Smart sheets.
Smart sheets.
Yeah, through our in-house deal. Yep.
Okay, so how do you use all of that information? Last time we talked, you said it was all
Excuse me.
KPI, known points of information or interest or something.
Yeah.
KPI is basically analytics, right?
Yep.
So how do y'all use that KPI to your advantage?
Well, it just helps us track. I mean, it helps us see when, who's doing what. Let's just use safety for an example. It's a great thing. I'm huge on safety, so I like, we track it. If your superintendent on your site doesn't have his rigging and signaling, then I get alerted every week. Hey, this guy hasn't completed his training. So then that gives me we have a safety director, and that's all he does. That gives me the point to go and say, hey, Mr. Gamache, what have we got to do to get this guy where he needs to be? And that's kind of the same way with everything. So it just helps us track everything we do. And by tracking is knowledge. You know, we know what's happening, we know what's not happening without having to be right over your shoulder micromanaging you. You know, I can tell what you're doing for the most part without, you know, maybe I don't get to talk to you for a week or what, because everybody's busy. I can still go back and say, okay, here's his. I mean, we track everything: daily reports, safety reports, toolbox talk, whatever you want to call it. We track all that. And I can look at those percentages and say, hey, Mr. Smith, we got an issue. I need you to come to the office and get your PM in here. We're going to have a discussion about this and figure out why this is not happening. And then, like I said, then we just go to whatever the next step is. Then we'll watch it, see if it improves. If it doesn't, then, and it goes with the punch list. If you send a punch list out and I see it. If I'm in the email, I see it. And that's when I reach out to my PM and they say, oh, well, I got it. Okay. Well, I want to see that it's corrected on the daily report. I want them to let me know that this was corrected so I can track you know, if they don't do the daily report, then I know that. And then it reminds me to say, hey, what about the punch list that you didn't put on your daily report?
How do you get reminded? Is it
Email.
Is it all set up to be automatic? If a box doesn't get checked, then you're notified. Or if this certain box gets checked, you're notified. It's reminding you and automating the system so that you don't have to constantly remember to check it, right?
Yeah, everything is a reminder.
Okay.
Everything is set up as a reminder. So, and it may be, you know, I'm not in the daily on-site part of the process. So certain things come to me once it gets to a certain level, things come to me. If it gets to another level, it'll go to my boss, along with me. So, but it's an automatic reminder.
Okay.
It may not be that they didn't check this box. It's like a lot of things. There's an asterisk that says you can't move forward without checking this box.
Oh, okay.
Right. So they have to check the box in certain situations, but if the box is checked, you know, like a safety, you know, a toolbox talk. You know, if I don't, I get an alert every day that says who did their daily report, who did their toolbox, and because I requested that, they can set the system up to work any way you want to, but I request it so I know, hey, this guy didn't do his daily pre-task. Why? And I'll send him an email. Why didn't you do your daily pre-task? He'll give me an explanation. You know, the sub didn't show up till 10 o'clock. I had a meeting, whatever the circumstances may be.
I like that.
Yep.
Automating systems so that you already got enough stuff in your head that you got to keep track of. Whatever you can automate, the easier it makes your life.
Yeah.
That constant reminder from something else telling you, hey, I need to check on this.
Yep, exactly.
I love being able to do that. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to cover?
I think that's it. Whatever you got.
Man, that was a good conversation.
I'm here. Yep, I liked it.
I appreciate you coming.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you inviting me.
All right. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.